So it seems that some Democrats, and I'm very careful to say only some Democrats, have finally realized that crime is bad. I know that this is going to be...
Crime is bad?
I know this is surprising for you and many others.
No way.
Given that they seem to be, let's be honest, very pro-crime in the past, or at least very pro-criminals in the past, talking about how they're delicate souls. Every criminal is really Robin Hood on the inside. It's only doing it because of socioeconomic factors. All of this nonsense. But no, it turns out that once again, something that we've been finding out a lot over these weekend segments is that when ideology comes smack bang straight into reality, all of a sudden people can change their minds. And I saw a lot of people talking about this story that I'm going to talk about in a way that using pithy quotes like, I don't know who the quote's attributed to, but a conservative is a liberal who got mugged by reality. I've seen that a few times. And it's a great little sentence because it makes sense and it does check out a lot of the time. And before we go any further, a new comics corner, number 4, we're on 4 episodes already between me and Connor, has just come out where we're talking about identity crisis and its follow-up story, Cry for Justice, as well as briefly mentioning the story, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, in the American Way, the Superman story, where we're talking about different aspects of criminal justice and what the appropriate means to prevent crime is, and other such things that are all very relevant to a lot of these stories. So I thought that would be appropriate, and also it was a really good chat. I know that a lot of people really love What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, in the American Way. Connor and I were pretty critical of it, and a lot of people also hate Identity Crisis, whereas Connor and I were actually we praised it a lot. I thought it was a really good story. So if you want an interesting discussion that might take some opinions that you've not seen put forward towards those stories, go check out that video. We're very proud of it, and you have to be at least a bronze tier member to watch it, which, good for you, is only £5 a month. So subscribe to the website and check that out. Anyway, so this is the story that I saw that sort of started my thinking about this, which is a Democratic representative was in Washington, D.C. and was attacked when she was on her way to her apartment in her own apartment building. I've got the clip here from CBS Mornings News, so let's play this clip so we can get the full picture.
An attack on a member of Congress is raising questions about the treatment of repeat offenders who may also be mentally ill. Minnesota Congresswoman Angie Craig says that she fought off a convicted criminal who punched her in the face and tried to get into her apartment in Washington. Craig is now calling for changes to prevent known criminals from targeting new victims. And she spoke to our Scott McFarland, who joins us now from Capitol Hill. Scott, sounds like a good idea in principle. Good morning.
Hey, Tony, good morning. The crime happened not far from here in an elevator in the Congresswoman's Capitol Hill apartment complex. And she says it reveals a problem happening in too many American communities.
There was no way in hell I was letting him up to my apartment. And so
Angie Craig says she spotted Kendron Hamlin, a man police believe to be homeless, in the lobby of her apartment complex last week. According to police, he was acting erratic, as if he was under the influence of an unknown substance. The encounter happened just after 7 in the morning when Craig bought her morning coffee. A police affidavit says after Craig said good morning to Hamlin, he followed her into an elevator, trapped her, and demanded to go inside her apartment.
that was the moment that fight or flight kicked in.
Police say Hamlin punched Craig in the face, grabbed her by the shoulder and collarbone and near her neck.
All I could do was throw my coffee over my shoulder, which startled him. But as soon as he regained, he came back toward me. And again, it was only until we got to the floor the elevator was headed to that I was able to escape.
When police tracked down Hamlin, they say he kicked an officer and bit a detective. A CBS News review finds Hamlin had a lengthy track record of menacing crimes on and near Capitol Hill. Just weeks ago, he served time for striking a police officer and spitting blood at them. Also on his record, shoplifting, indecent exposure, breaking and entering, and more.
I got attacked by someone who the District of Columbia has not prosecuted fully over the course of almost a decade, over the course of 12 assaults before mine that morning. And so I think we have to think about how in the world can we make sure that we're not just letting criminals out. I mean, it wasn't even in every instance that he got 10 days or 30 days. Many times the charges were completely dropped before any justice was achieved at all.
The alleged attack comes as Craig begins her 5th year in Congress, which has grappled over the past several years with criminal justice reform. And just last week debated a bill on how to better prevent repeat offenders.
We have to get these repeat offenders off the streets. We also have got to figure out how we get people the mental health and the addiction help that they need, because these people are getting back out and they're just recommitting the same crimes over and over and over again.
One congressional proposal just released would require local prosecutors to better track how many criminal defendants have criminal pasts, how many have been given plea agreements, how many have been released to potentially reoffend. As for Kendron Hamlin, he's back in court here in Washington tomorrow, and his defense attorney did not return requests for comment.
So it's promising at least to see that Congress people in the US are happily seeing that, okay, this is a problem and we need to fix it. Those sorts of reforms that they were talking about, like keeping track of how many repeat offences that a particular criminal has had when they come into court, should be taken into account. All of that's good. It's just a shame that a lot of the time the only way to get this into these people's heads is for them to experience it firsthand. And it's awful what's happened to her. And I think, first of all, we need to address the really serious issue here. This man was biting people. He was spitting blood. We need to take care of Washington, D.C.'s vampire problem. But I understand that it's a case of them protecting their own, because that would mean clearing out most of the Capitol building. Sorry.
I've got a couple of things to say about that. The first is it's quite funny that they circled his Nike trainers in the in the clip with the picture of the guy. I don't know why that was relevant. The second
it did feel a bit like a YouTube thumbnail.
It did, yeah. The second is actually serious. It shouldn't come to someone personally attacking members of Congress for them to realise that crime is bad. They should already know through basic common sense. I mean, most children know that crime is bad and that, you need people to stop people being criminals. Yes. It shouldn't be a lesson that needs to be learnt in the first place.
Over the past few years, like I say, we've seen criminality pathologized. Rather than some people just make bad decisions, end up screwing their lives up and do bad things to try and make up for that, it's got to be turned into, it's mental illness, it's got to be turned into socioeconomic factors, it's got to be turned into all of this sort of stuff. Whereas at the base level of it, some people just do bad things.
Yeah,
and we can't continually make excuses for them, and we certainly can't end up letting them out of jail time and time again. I mean, during the 2020 riots, there were reports of some people basically going in and out of jail multiple times in a row. They would get processed through, 5 minutes in jail, straight out again, re-offend straight away.
Wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
But I very much agree that by framing it as, they're mentally ill, no, everyone has the capacity to do bad things. It's just that a lot of people have enough self-control not to do it. You don't necessarily have to be mentally ill to do something horrific to someone else.
Yes, but it is horrible what happened to Angie Craig, and it's good that she is speaking out on this. I think it's good to see Democratic representatives, kind of in the Tulsi Gabbard sense, recognizing some of the outer limits of the insanity that is democratic ideology, or at least democratic process, and deciding, well, maybe we should try and push back against this, maybe we should rein this in, let's not be completely insane about it.
My concern would be that it would be like lunatic progressive whack-a-mole, in that you get the reason people becoming more and more reasonable, and then they just get pushed out of the party, and then you get a new AOC equivalent.
Yeah, you do worry about that, because AOC is absolutely balmy, and you don't want an entire party of AOCs. But
Lord
with
help
somebody
us.
like Craig, maybe she'll be able to pull herself out of the nuttiness that is leftist ideology. But for instance, following up on that, in this article, it says that hours after the assault on Craig, the GOP-led House of Representatives voted 250 to 173 to overturn a revamping of the district, that's the District of Columbia, where Washington, D.C. is, of that district's criminal code, which was going to lower the maximum penalties for burglary, carjacking, and robbery. So if it wasn't a GOP-led House of Representatives, it seems as though they still would have overturned it, but it would have been to a lesser extent. Craig joined 31 Democrats in voting for the measure. And we will get on to, in a little bit as we go on, that Craig does not seem to be an insane Democrat, like some are, but she has in the past supported certain things that people are calling her out about and saying that this is somewhat hypocritical compared to what you were supporting and voting for a few years ago. For instance, this Breitbart article points out that last year, a woman called Liz Young, who was Craig's district director, so she's the head of the office that she runs, called on Minnesota to fund counselors, not cops, in the midst of the 2020 racial riots. On the same day she called for decreased law enforcement funding, she shared a report on police-involved deaths in New York with the caption, "Burn it all down." Young then downplayed the burning of Minneapolis police station and argued that replacing the station with a community-led healthcare clinic or a library would do infinitely more good. In addition to the anti-law enforcement tweets, Young encouraged her followers to donate to the Minnesota Freedom Fund, a non-profit dedicated to bailing violent protesters out of jail. So whether or not this reflects Craig's views herself, at the time she was employing, and probably still is employing, somebody who was actively helping to put the same sort of people who attacked her out on the street again. Not a good.
I find articles like this Breitbart one really irritating, actually.
Oh, yes.
Because it's a terrible way to incentivize people to agree with you. If when they do finally agree with you, you're just like, well, you used to think this. You're a hypocrite. It's like, yeah, people can change their mind, and you don't incentivize people to come over to your side and agree with you if you act like well, you used to think this many years ago, or you did this in the past, but now you've had a change of heart.
No, I agree, but I do think it is important to hold politicians accountable to what they've said in the past. For instance,
well, of course, I don't disagree with that.
Politicians are very slippery on such things. Like, for instance, last September, there was the Rishi Sunak Spectator article where Sunak was explaining how I was always against the lockdowns. I was always somebody who was fighting in the corner of the British person. I was there. I was the hero.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we've got to recognise when politicians are potentially being slippery. With this, I do think Craig is being legit.
Yeah, and I think it's
honest.
What I said is very specific to contexts like this.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily where politician says they did one thing and actually did another. Well, that's obvious that you point that out. But if someone seems to be genuinely changing their mind towards your position, and then rather than being like, well, good, you've made the right choice, you're just like, well, you used to think this and you're stupid. You're not going to encourage other people to follow suit.
Yes, I am trying to be even-handed here because I do want to point out things where she's gone wrong. Obviously, this is the words of a district director, not Craig herself, but when you're a political candidate and you run a particular office, you're going to have a hard time convincing me that the sorts of people that you hire in that office aren't going to have some kind of effect on your views, or at least some kind of influence in how the office is run, which might in reality have more influence over what gets done, because, you know, the actual day-to-day management of such things often leads to practical results.
Yeah.
But she had also, before you go any further, I'll let you go. Go on.
Sorry, I didn't mean to butt in there, but I just wanted to say, yeah, I think she's still a member of the Democratic Party. She's still reprehensible, right? Anyone that's in that party has no claim to morality. I just wanted to clarify, I was making a political strategy point. In terms of morality, yes, still a bad person, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know her personally. I can't say that she's a bad person, but she did
represents
previously.
the Democrats.
In 2021, she did vote for the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which is a bad thing, because if we go to this Guardian article that explains what it does, it was reforming U.S. police departments, cracking down on controversial tactics like no-knock warrants, which was always one of those ones. What was her name? Breonna Taylor was the one that they always used as the example for why no-knock warrants are bad, even though if you actually look into any of the details, the police officers who went there didn't do a no-knock. They actually knocked, which is what gave the criminal who was in the apartment time to get his gun and start shooting.
So actually,
which is what led to Breonna Taylor's death, because she was caught in the crossfire. And it was also going to make it easier to prosecute officers accused of violence. It did that by aiming to end or mitigate qualified immunity for police officers. And that's a very controversial topic of discussion, because I can understand that we want police officers to be held accountable when they mess up, and there should be internal processes for doing that. Qualified immunity does seem to be necessary on a purely practical level in a lot of cases, sadly, because otherwise you would probably get, one, nobody would want to sign up to be a police officer because you could get sued for literally anything that you do, and two, because of that, you could get sued for literally anything. Say, potentially, in the process of detaining a criminal, you have to use force because they're resisting arrest, and you know that there's somebody who has done wrong, and they end up going to prison, they could still potentially sue you off the back of that for an abuse of force or something like that.
I've always been inclined to say empower citizens to deal with things themselves as much as humanly possible, and the police should only step in if things get out of hand.
Yeah, this is why we need strong Second Amendment such things in the US. We need to focus on both of these things. We need to focus on allowing people to be able to defend and resolve their own issues wherever possible, but where the police need to come in, we don't want to neuter them past the point of them being completely ineffective.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about giving them some sort of legal immunity from their actions. I think that
it's a very difficult subject.
I've seen lots of cases where I'm just like, yeah, that's messed up. I don't want that. Like recently, I'm not sure of the context or how genuine it is, so please take this with a pinch of salt. But a man supposedly tried to commit suicide, and he was in a hospital like gurney, strapped down, and the police officers were slapping him in the face, even though he was restrained and he was the danger to himself, and they were hurting him, and he was obviously very distressed, being slapped in the face
That's not
very
going to
hard.
help him with the distress, is it?
No. So people like that shouldn't have legal immunity.
And the police officers, for instance, who recently ended up beating, which caused the death of Tyree Nichols, for instance, those police officers, it's absolutely right that they have been fired, and it's absolutely right that there should be legal action taken against them. Because if you watch that camera footage, the force that they used was completely out of touch with what was actually going on.
I didn't actually follow that, but
I
shall take your word for it.
Anyway, let's carry on. So what else it was doing? The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. It was going to ban law enforcement officers from using chokehold, like the one that ended George Floyd's life, in big quotation marks there. It would require state and local police departments to receive federal funding to adopt the same policy. So if you wanted to receive money from the federal government, you would have to adopt all of these policies. If not, you're basically screwed. State and local police departments that receive federal funding would be required to enforce a number of other policies as well, including providing officers with body cameras. This is not a bad thing, in my opinion. Body cameras are a good thing. Problem is,
it's good for police as well, because then it can corroborate their account of events if they're being honest.
Yeah, problem is it comes packaged with all of this other stuff, doesn't it? Including establishing anti-discrimination programs and mitigating the use of deadly force. Why didn't you just shoot him in the knee, bro? Aren't you John Wick, bro? Why can't you just disarm the violent criminal when he's running at you with a knife? Come on, man. I hate that line of argument, and that's what it was kind of going for. And that's because you can tell that politicians don't really know what's going on. I think they have recently implemented a policy, maybe since 2020, 2021, where new candidates and representatives, when they're in their first year in Congress, they have to go on a ride along with police officers so that they can see what the actual life is like, so they're not potentially going to put in ridiculous policies that neuter their ability to do anything effectively. So that could be beneficial, but that wasn't part of the George Floyd and Policing Act. Then we've also got some things that she said since then, where she has gone back on it and said that since a lot of stuff has gone down, this was last year that she was talking in September, she said that her thinking had evolved since then. Knowing what I know now and how attacks on law enforcement have negatively impacted recruitment and retention and morale, and how those factors hurt public safety efforts, I think that qualified immunity must remain in place for our law enforcement officers. The Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association lobbied the state's congressional delegation to oppose the federal qualified immunity change, said spokeswoman Leslie Rosenthal. The group had not yet endorsed Craig and the Phillips races. So I think she does end up getting endorsed by a few police departments, because since all of that went down, and since the George Floyd and Policing Act and whatnot, she has become pretty pro law enforcement, which it shouldn't it shouldn't take some exceptional circumstances for you to do these. But once again, she does seem to be changing her mind on some things. If we move past this next link, that's unnecessary. If we go to the one afterwards, she's done some fact checks on these sorts of things, but at the same time, it's all couched in very political, charged language. So she says she's refuting here some claims that she has been anti-police officers in the past. And I think you can say, well, if you've agreed with the George Floyd Justice Policing Act, if you voted in behalf of that, that is an actively anti-police
How many police
measure.
Departments supported that act, I wonder?
Yeah.
Probably a big fat zero, right?
Exactly. But in this, it says she was the first member of the Minnesota congressional delegation to oppose the ballot initiative to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department. She currently supports community-orientated policing grants to hire more officers in 4 South Metro cities. Got bipartisan Public Safety Officer Support Act signed into law to expand support for officers facing mental health struggles and to help their families access their benefits. I assume that's if the officer dies in service, and also passed the bipartisan Invest to Protect Act to increase funding for small and mid-sized police departments. So these are all positive, as far as I'm concerned. These are all positive changes. But then you also go to the next one, where there's another fact sheet that she put forward where she says, among other things, she voted for George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and she says she's voted repeatedly to fund the police since then and understands that retaining qualified immunity is a critical element of law enforcement's recruitment and retention efforts. It also claims that she voted for bills that would put $10 billion in the pockets of local police departments, for instance. But when you actually look into it, you realize that the bill that she was voting for in favor of that sort of thing, the $10 billion would have come from the Build Back Better bill from 2021, which was the, I think, 1,500 page long, $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that would have completely upended US society. So you can say as part of that $10 billion is a drop in the water with the $3.5 trillion that was going to be used to change all sorts of other things. So once again, as with many politicians, it's kind of on the line, not really something that you can say is entirely good. But her voting record recently is not as bad as it could be, because she is only one of only 7 Democrats to vote in favor of removing COVID pass restrictions for people traveling to the US by air. So there are some positive things going on here. It seems that like you said, I don't think that we should immediately be going on the attack when something happens that causes somebody to change their mind about something.
Carrot and stick, isn't it?
If somebody is making positive changes and actually voting for legislation that I think is beneficial and is good, we should praise them for that while still reminding them that you've done stupid things in the past. And I think that that's what I'm trying to do here, because yes, Democrats should realize that crime is bad and affects people who aren't you. So the next time any of you are thinking about putting forward bills that would neuter police departments and let criminals get out of prison far sooner than they should off the back of violent crimes, maybe consider that this could actually happen to you. It shouldn't have to come to that, because you should be concerned for your constituents and the people that you're supposed to be representing. But next time, if that doesn't work for you, think, do I want to be attacked in my elevator by some random homeless crackhead?
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Our Cyberpunk Dystopia streams. And if you want to follow what else we're putting out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.